Good afternoon, everyone. The Ranter is back to go into yet another rambling diatribe of the news of the day. And I've been trying to do this video for a while, and the technical issues, timing, and real life kind of gets in the way of that. But I've decided that instead of trying to do one long form video of my topic, I'm going to break it up into two, and little smaller bit ones, so I can saturate and focus on each party and see if I can get my point across regardless. The topic that I'm going into is the degeneration of our politics. And what I mean by that is the downward slope of how our political system is not only done mechanically with our politicians, but through our perceptions of politics and what was once, the civility, tongue-in-cheek, veiled pandering of people, now is full-born, just go off the rails into tinfoil territory, pandering to the point of not even giving a shit, and frankly no real responsibility on the ground. That's at least an opinion on one side of the aisle. The other side of the aisle, which I'm going to talk about first, is how they react to this stuff, and how they're reacting in our current day in the positions that they are in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my side of the aisle, because the other side of the aisle is going to be much more fun for me, is the Democrats. Now, if you follow any of the polls, the Democratic Party, for the platforms, policies that they try, at least lip service to champion, majority of the American people support. There is support in majority for, obviously, to codify Roe v. Wade, support through, new technologies and new ways of propulsion in terms of the Green New Deal. Anything concerning the equality, civil rights, and normalizing of people as people, and not trying to have little segments of people that someone can, through a loophole, continue to demonize or still show, what's the right term for this? Opposition towards socially, if they couldn't do it, 50 years ago, when they can easily throw out a racial slur or a gender slur or an orientation slur. But now we no longer quite do that anymore, so we have to find other ways around to fuck people over. So, yeah, majority of people usually are on that side of supporting Democrats on these policies. However, hate to break it to you, the Democratic messaging system for this is crap. And why I say it's crap is that we are going into a midterms, and where the most likely outcome is that the Republicans are going to cream the Democrats. Now, I tend to think, after so long that I've been involved in watching politics and being involved in terms of my voting, so I'm talking about going back to 1996 up to now, is that I tend to think, as a philosophy of politics, that there is an ebb and flow in our politics. That regardless of whoever's in the office, whatever party is in power, at a certain point that party will overextend. We'll get a little bit too big for the britches. We'll go too far for the public taste. Either there is a scandal, in terms of maybe something that happened with a president, that reflects upon the party, so that the next time around, when the next election comes, either that president is already gone because of 8 years, or the president loses a re-election, and so the party that was attached to him gets whatever he did reflected onto them, and so they also lose party along with him. and then the other party steps in. Where I go with that analogy is the ending of Bill Clinton's presidential administration going into George Bush's administration, and see where the control was. For 8 years under Bush, what we had and what we went through, which ebbed that way because of Bill Clinton, flowed backwards by 2008 in the form of Barack Obama taking over the White House after 8 years of Bush, and not only that, had a rather strong showing in both the House and Senate, to the point where the Republican Party thought they were dead, that it was over for them, that it wasn't even that there was commentators on the various news outlets who was just like, the Republicans got so creamed they're going to have to either reevaluate or they're not going to lose existence. I mean, people likened it so bad of like the Johnson versus Goldwater presidential run, when Johnson won and the Democrats won, partly, and probably strong partly, is that the Democratic Party at that point switched their roles. Because prior to that, it was Republicans who were for civil rights. But then Democrats switched roles, and somehow for some reason Republicans like Goldwater was still in favor of segregation in whatever mental gymnastics they did. And so the Democrats seized on it, became the champions of civil rights, at least for the perceptual view of things, which allowed certain Democrats, like old Democrat Strom Thurmond, to change parties because he was a segregationist and he was a racist scumbag, and so he no longer felt comfortable with the Democratic Party, so he left. So there is an ebb and flow to politics. Either the power goes too far one way to the other way, and then when it goes too far that one way, the public goes, hey, wait a minute, we don't like what's going on here, we don't like how you're being perceived, and we're going to snap you back the other way. It's not an exact science of my theory because of the last election and how the results of that. In terms of that, why this past election is the exception to that rule. And no, that's because of election fraud, because that didn't exist. There is no tangible evidence of it. But we'll get to that on the Republican side. We'll have that discussion. But what I want to bring the point of that is that Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in the election. But the majorities in the House and the Senate for Democrats became so thin. Now, Trump had enjoyed that he had Republican control of the Senate. He didn't have control of the House. And that was lost in the midterms of his administration. Coming into the election here in 2020, the Democrats eked out a majority, a very narrow sliver of majority in the Senate, and had control of the House still, but far less. It's far less than it was beforehand. So, which is why the threat of this midterm for the Democrats that is going to switch back over is very real. But that's the thing, is that for Trump and all that we perceive of Trump and how bad things were under Trump, Democrats couldn't use that as momentum to not only get Joe Biden elected, but kick over a robust majority in the House and Senate for proper policies to be pushed. And this is where we segue into what's really an issue when concerning the Democrats, is that in between the two parties, Republicans know how to stay in lockstep with their positions. Be it their establishment, their classy, sophisticated Republicans in charge in the suits and, who always talk like they're elder statesmen, to the radical part of the Republican Party who throws out tinfoil like it was a sale at Safeway for it. But the Democrats don't seem to have that cohesion. And worse of it all, don't seem to have that cohesion in the public forum. So we all see that there is a schism. And we probably shouldn't be seeing that. But we'll see that, we have the progressive wing, the AOC wing, the Bernie Sanders wing. And the people of that wing who don't cotton to the establishment centrist way of Joe Biden and openly challenge that. Openly challenge Biden, openly challenge Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and so forth, publicly. Now, again, politics, like everything else in our current world, is perception. And so you're allowing the perception that the Democratic Party doesn't know what the hell it's talking about. Which shouldn't be the case. As I started this whole off, is that all the majority of the policies that Democrats are trying to back has majority populace approval. However, the messaging gets so skewed and off, and there is just an issue in terms of strategy with the Democratic Party. Going back and forth into trying to explain the differences between the Republicans and Democrats in terms of political strategy. The Republicans, pure on pro-life, political pro-life Republicans, I've made this definition clear, as opposed to true pro-life people who actually give a damn about not only the baby being born, but making sure the baby and the mother, that family unit thrives and has opportunity to thrive. That's pro-life. Political pro-life is, I'm going to use your unborn child as a political prop up to the point of that child being born. And once that's born, I don't want to know about you. Certainly not going to help you buy baby formula or help you help you with education or healthcare, etc., etc. We'll get to that in the next video. But they had the major victory of being able to bring down Roe in the court. Now, you have to understand something. This wasn't something that they just was able to do out of nowhere. Like, just, I'm shocked. It was 49 years in the making that the Republican Party had a goal, a gear shift into this goal. Whatever they say, on television, when they're more aggressively tinfoil, people will wave their hands and flail about and get the sound bites. The rest of them are working. And you have to look at the breadcrumbs of how we got to this point. It wasn't just a matter of the court decided on their own that we're going to bring down Roe. You have to think of everything else that came before then. First of all, obviously, having Supreme Court justices that unfortunately died or retire get picked up during the Trump administration, so you have that 6-3 majority. There's that. Clearly, that's a big thing. However, you just because you have those Supreme Court justices doesn't necessarily mean they go, oh, well, I'm just going to decide to destroy Roe now. No, you need a court case to get to their attention for them to do so. They don't unilaterally do anything. You bring the cases to them, then they decide, and then that's when the laws get codified or laws get removed or policies disappear. So there's that little point, which was the later half of this. Quietly, while Democrats are worrying about national issues, especially during the Obama administration, Republicans quietly were taking over state houses, taking over the local politics of various states. So when the time came for, let's say, for a point in time, Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed to the Supreme Court, majority of these states that had overwhelming Republican majorities started pumping out heartbeat bills. And from there, they were able to make these bills as horrible and as draconic as humanly possible to get challenged, because they wanted it to get challenged, so that when the challenge would go up and up and up into the courts, it hits the Supreme Court. And by the time it hits the Supreme Court, guess what? 6-3. See, that's the Republican mentality of long-term planning. That is the strategy. That is a winning, working strategy. Democrats, I do not know if they really have that in their party, be it the institutional establishment wing of it or the progressive wing, that they have the patience, the willingness, the drive to have this type of long-term thinking. Because as far as our perception is, we want things now. We want things to change now. Things have to change now. It's now or never. And unfortunately, in our political environment, that doesn't quite translate into victories towards that. Issues I have with the Democratic Party is concerning, because not only the schism between the progressive and the establishment wing, the establishment reminds me, the Democratic establishment reminds me of the stereotype of people having of the Republican establishment when they had control, that they were the old guard, they were the 20th century old guard that was still trying to clutch to power, trying, as their hand is being pulled away from the lever, that's still trying to hold on with their liver-spotted hand, because they didn't want to let it go. And here we are with a democratic establishment, 20th century men and women in the 21st century world, that no matter how much we're seeing the world change around us, that people who were marginalized should be normalizing now, that we should be accepting as people, throughout all our differences, we're all still people, right? But nonetheless, the establishment that has its own set ways, who's clinging on to what's left of their control of power at this point, is not hearing what the progressive wing wants, and therefore not really hearing what the American people want. There isn't a strategy to give the progressive wing the successes that they should have for the progress that the United States should have going forward, socially, economically, because the grip is too set in the way. Now, it's been brought up that another problem with Democrats, because they are on the back foot of this, is that their unwillingness to compromise with the Republicans on the major bills that they want. They're not willing to water them down, so that it could be palatable for the Republicans, so they can sign off on it. Pardon me while I have a drink. Unlike Sidney Powell, I wasn't going to spend 30 seconds. Anyway. They don't want to actually do what compromise does, because people when they want to compromise, they want to compromise from the position of having a winning hand, and everyone on both sides of the aisle has this sad point of view of compromise being it's my way or the highway. No. Compromise means that you come with a proposal, they come with a counter-proposal, you hammer it out, you make concessions, they make concessions, it's both agreeable, you shake, you move forward. You don't get everything that you want, they don't get everything that they want, however you get something, they get something, and you move forward. An example, what this is that why even slow motion progress is still progress. People wanted to abolish slavery at the start. At the start of our country. At the Declaration of Independence, when it comes down to it. Slaveholding Thomas Jefferson actually wrote about slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but that had gotten taken out because the southern colonies would not sign on to a Declaration of Independence that said any mention of slavery. We turn forward, the Constitution, 3/5 clause. Yeah, we hear about that. That's all bullshit. That's the way that they were thinking at that point because of census. However, slow motion of progress was that around the turn of the century into the 19th century, they are starting to outlaw international transcontinental slave trading, which means that people, slave owners, slave dealers, slave brokers, could no longer actively bring men and women from Africa to the Western Hemisphere as slaves. It is such a small point, and it's like, so they're still getting slaves. It's still a major point because that is a point away from slaveholding. So with the resulting that the only slaves that could be bought was either those who came about were already in the Western Hemisphere, either in the States or anywhere else on the continent and the Caribbean, and goes from there. But then you have the Great Compromise that brought into question any new territory that would become a state would have the choice to become either a free state or a slave state, which caused the battle lines to be drawn to the upcoming Civil War that would come a few decades later from the Great Compromise. That was also a weakening point of slavery. Fast forward to the Civil War, where slavery got abolished, not out of the righteousness of it should be abolished, but because of the need as an economic measure to hurt the rebelling South. But again, it was a small point, even to the abolition of slavery, which is a major issue, nonetheless is small, simply because then you have all these people who are freed, that now you have to spend the next 100 years to the 1960s before you actually seriously decide to give these people, these men, women, and children, civil rights, to give them at least the illusion of equality towards the Crayola peach and apricot skin pigmentation, right? And still, you can really, if you just look, you still see that's still a struggle going on here. But that is the slow motion of progress. That is an example of slow motion progress. We, for at least the majority of those in the Democratic Party, at least the progressive side of it, don't want to do that. And they want these changes and innovations now. When it took 100 years after a civil war to even give free people equality, where it took almost maybe 130 years since the Constitution, since the first presidential administration, that women were allowed to vote in the early part of the 20th century. We're going to have things now in this country where our history is that you take a little tic-tac, that's as far as we can go, until that tic-tac grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. But it takes a long time for it to grow. The problems that I see with the Democratic Party in terms of this point of view is that there is a lack of realism of our politics. Realism means you're looking at the numbers. It's pragmatism. You're looking at the numbers of what you got. Small majority in the House, real small majority in the Senate that all it takes is Manchin and Sinema to go, oh no, I'm going to go with the Republicans over here to end anything you want to do. Which we saw today. Joe Manchin decided, oh, you know what? I don't like this whole climate thing. I'm getting too much money from the coal industry, so, you know, fuck your climate. And he's going to go with the Republicans, killing that part of the economic bill. But even at the start of Joe Biden's administration, progressives who really should keep their arguments behind the closed doors instead of having them publicly displayed, apparently are trying to show that their passion means more than the numbers. That what you have in terms of how to get things across, get bills across the finish line, it requires a lot of compromise to get anything done. I mean, we have some successes in terms of the infrastructure bill that Trump could never do with all his infrastructure weeks. Joe Biden was able to do. It got compromised, it got a little watered down. Nonetheless, it got done. But anything else that we're going to try to do, especially socially, to secure people's civil rights and basic human respect, that's probably not going to fly with a narrow, razor-thin, nearly non-existent majority in the Senate and just a little bit better in the House. And it's the lack of realism that, you know, this should be an anthem to rev people up to vote, not something that you should be pushing for now. Make it one of those things of like saying you want to codify Roe. Well, you're not going to codify Roe now. I don't know why that was even attempted when Roe went down and they're trying to push a bill through the House and Senate on this. And it's like, is that for symbolism? Are you just symbolically? Oh, I'm fighting the good fight. No, it wasn't going to fly. It will fly if you have a robust, I can't even speak today, but a bigger majority in the House and Senate. Then that can function, then that can work, then you could have that. But right now, no. I'm sorry. Reality on the ground, realism. Sometimes causes cannot be won on the day you make it a cause. Causes takes a long time to be won. It takes ground level. And I hate to break it to you. When Roe v. Wade was established, the Republican Party had a cause. They had a cause for 49 years. And they had the will to make that cause achieve success. Not in grand statements, not in national statements that they have their people go to the talking head shows, but slow little measures. Filling up the House seats at the State House so they can build the little heartbeat bills. Wait and bide their time until they get enough of a majority in the Supreme Court in order to make sure they can bring down Roe, which frankly was a bit like Swiss cheese at the time. Slow and steady, they got what they wanted. Which, in my thinking, maybe that will be a little bit of a backfire for them, because one thing I say in politics is that you have to have, when you have any type of like really social major policy, that you rally against and rail against and you're being very passionate for, half the time it appears like you're doing that for the money, for the donor money. To put your rallies together, to bring all these people, to hype them up with passion and righteous indignation that I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to bring this down for you. So let's pass the plate. Let's see your donations so you can get me into the Congress, you can get me into the Senate, hell, you can get me into the White House. Then I will fight for you to bring this cause to life. And then when they finally get into office, they say, huh, what? You wanted me to do? Oh, no, I'm sorry, the schedule. There's just so much going on here, but it's there. I'm totally going to fight for it. I'm going to fight for it probably around the next time you try to elect me. Yeah, that's right. That no matter how much they want these things to be gone, at least publicly, they don't really want this to be gone. Because that's the money for their campaigns, for their parties, for themselves, for those who like to funnel campaign donations to themselves so they can have a nice little cherry ride. But the Republicans showed the example of long-term political strategy. Democrats do not. And that is a sad state of affairs, given that so many Democrats in the establishment are these long-term career politicians that should be reading out of the same playbook, and some of us suspect that they do. But in terms of Democrats, and this lack of strategy, the one thing I'm gonna land this video on is one of the flaws of the Democratic Party in this current incarnation at this particular moment in time is that they are too reactionary. They are reacting to the Republicans. They are reacting to the actions of Republicans. But they're not really showing an alternative. Now, those of you out of the dozen that watch these kind of know how I feel about Donald Trump. From video 1 here to even my first video on Facebook before I started doing the YouTube thing, that I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. That I was pretty clear about that. But the one thing that I wanted to make it understood, that for Democrats, being opposed to Donald Trump is not enough. It's not enough just to be, oh, Donald Trump is an unqualified, disqualified piece of shit and he needs to go. Well, great, we got that opinion, but what are you going to do for us? Huh? Well, what are you going to do for us? What is the benefit are we going to get for voting for you and putting you in a position of power? We'll get rid of Donald Trump? Okay, we established that, but what are you going to do afterwards? Exactly. That's the problem. That's the reactionary problem. It's not enough just to oppose the other side. It is important and necessary for you to provide not only the alternative to them, and give people a reason. Again, Democrats, majority of the policies that we, but through lip service, supposed to be championed, people approve of it. They want it. But we are not doing anything other than opposing what the Republicans are doing. We're reacting to the Republicans. We're clutching our pearls over whatever bullshit the Republicans are saying. Either we're doing that, or we're so sensitive that we might lose support one way or another to the various people that supports the Democrats, almost on tradition, that we pander like to the point of pathetic perception of it. I mean, I won't go into details upon what I'm referring to, but you've seen the pictures of certain congressmen, certain white congressmen and women deciding to exercise their solidarity with our fellow Americans of a different and darker skin pigmentation a little bit cheesy and a little bit self-servingly sad and petty. Oh, I support you because I'm wearing this. So clearly, I'm supporting you and everything that you fought for and everything that you want happen to better your lives, without the monicum of ever trying to understand the experience that you have that we will never have. But we'll show empathy. We'll show empathy by, wearing this. Wear a nice little hat. Isn't that? See, we're connecting. We're connecting. That's not emphasize. That's not being empathetic to them, to these various people that should be no different than us in our minds, but it reminds me of, strangely enough, it reminds me of a South Park episode where Cartman wants to get in on Kyle's birthday party because he was going to go Casa Bonita. And he tried a few times to convince Kyle, but Kyle wasn't wanting him to go because he was already invited Butters and he wasn't going to go. So Cartman shows up in a sweater and still wants him to convince him to go, and he's still being harsh about it. And Cartman goes, well, I don't understand. I'm being nice. And Kyle goes, no, you're not being nice. You're just wearing a nice sweater. I don't understand the distinction. I know. It reminds me of that in a weird kind of way. But for Democrats, as I'll reemphasize here, you have to be more than what you are opposing. You have to give options and provide an alternative. You have to try to listen to the people, at least in your districts. I mean, sometimes we gotta understand that politics is down to local. So when we piss on Joe Manchin and Krista Sinema, we have to remember that they are representing Democrats in districts and in states that are red. Those who vote for them are not progressive liberals here. There may be Democrats, maybe, but so moderate and centrist that they shift right far easier than they will ever shift left. And for their political livelihoods, they have to go along with that. Which is why they will fall away from big ticket Democratic issues in favor of keeping their own political livelihoods alive in their Republican districts in their Republican states. It is the unfortunate thing. This is the way it is, and this is why we need a robust, finally got the word, robust Senate numbers and House numbers to nullify these two, which will always be a subtraction, which will always make that razor-thin majority non-existent. That takes strategy. That takes the will of the political policy to do political policies not in the short term, but the long term. And I said from the outset is that the odds are good that the Democrats are going to lose control of the House and the Senate. Definitely the Senate, probably the House. In terms of sports, we could look at this as a rebuilding year. Not fall and cry out to the crowd of how we lost. Because I still remember in 2004 how people were going, oh, I'm going to leave the country if Bush gets reelected. I'm going to live and Bush gets reelected. Oh, geez, thanks for making that stupid statement. I never believed that. We lose. You stay in the trenches. You stay and you fight. If you have something to believe in, you actually have something to believe in. You don't just drop it because you lost. Politics is never a definite win or lose. Very few things happens in our politics that is irreversible. But some things can be reversed. Some things can be taken away. And all it takes is people with the will and the long-term planning to put all the pieces together to make it happen. Fortunately, Republicans were able to do that. The Democrats need to learn that, or we're going to spend the next 20 years at max. I mean, I don't want to get that dramatic and say it's 20 years, but for how long it's going to take for Republican control to go so overreaching that the majority of the policies, politics, and if there are any scandals, will make the people go, fuck this idea, we're going to go back the other way. The ebb and flow. But it will require us to be vigilant. And not just, bitch and moan, or when something happens. Be ready to build up the alternative. Because it's not just Roe v. Wade that is going down here. Clarence Thomas already telegraphed there are certain other court cases that they would be interested in taking down for their faulty and frailness. Could that be the provisions of gay marriage or civil unions or anything else that could be on the way? You see, these are the type of things that should be the anthems that should light the fire under voters to go out en masse to vote. However, once again, Democratic messaging is so flawed, and you don't quite see the difference, or you don't quite see the solidarity, of the Democratic Party on their message when you have Biden saying this, AOC saying that, and they're not really connecting here. And again, as I said this before, Democrats need to step up and bring up another Democratic alternative for the presidency, because Joe Biden is not it. He's not wowing me. Not that it matters so much as that for the presidential administration to be approved by me, of course. But what I wanted out of a Democratic president is to recognize what was going on at the border to being wrong under Trump, to try to fix that, to do the things that he didn't want to do, including hiring more immigration lawyers, immigration judges, to facilitate the actual legal process of getting people into the country or out of the country legally and more expeditiously than what we're doing now, instead of making it to the point of desperation so that their people could be political photo ops when someone's trying to jump a border. And stop putting kids in cages, stop ripping families apart. And Biden's not doing any of that. Not really. For someone who ran on this, saying the horrors, the rightful horrors that Trump was doing at the border, that he was proud to do, because once again, let me make this clear. Obama did this shit too. He was the deporter-in-chief. Cages were built under his watch. The thing is, Barack Obama wasn't proud about it. He didn't mention it as much as how proud Trump was, and all the Trump minions were proud to do it. But Biden, I guess following the same playbook as Obama, still continuing to do this without mentioning, without being proud about it. So either that gets fixed in the next 2 years before I even consider Biden again, Or, because the only reason why I would ever vote for Biden is if Trump, at his 78 years old by the time 2024 comes along, which was the same age as Biden going into 2020. So if anyone who was messing with Biden in terms of his age, if they're not quiet about it with Trump, you're all fucking hypocrites. But if Trump goes and runs again in 2024, that might be the only reason. So please, Democrats, do me a favor. Put somebody else up. Someone else to challenge Biden. Maybe somebody younger. Maybe someone who has who probably has a better track record with the progressive wing, who can actually provoke thought and capture the imagination. I don't know who that person is because I don't see anybody on the Democratic side actually doing that, but would be nice. So that is my thinking on the degeneration of politics concerning the Democrats. Stay tuned when I have a bit more fun dissecting the Republicans. I'll see you later. No matter how long it takes for me to record that one.